Welcome everybody to our first 2021 WEAll Talk. I'm really excited to see all your faces and really excited about what this 2021 is ahead, for all of us, and working together with all of you is always a pleasure. So Yannick, for those who have never met him in any of our monthly members calls or any other calls related with WEAll, is a Senior Economist and Director-General for Ontario and Northern Canada with the David Suzuki Foundation. And today he's going to be talking about embracing diversity and participation to reimagine the purpose of an economic system. And that was the beginning of the WEAll CAN story. So he's going to be really generous in sharing with us the journey that he's been going through with many other people, but he's been leading on it. For those who are joining us for the first time, because I do recognize many of the faces, but some others I don't. So I'm really glad to see that you are joining us today. A WEAll Talk. WEAll Talks were thought of a space where we can go into deeper discussions on specific topics. So this is not a webinar. It's not about you listening to Yannick. We are going to, but only for a very specific amount of time. And then is for us to participate by asking questions, by sharing, ideas or examples or own experiences. So this is a conversation space, and I hope you'll feel super comfortable and to participate and to make this conversation around the topic that Yannick has decided to share with us, to make it unforgettable. So by the way, for those who don't know who I am, I always forget this part, I'm Anna, and I am the network lead for Wellbeing Economy Alliance, WEAll. And again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope we're gonna have a lot of fun together with Yannick. Yannick, over to you. Oh, I don't want to forget this. While Yannick is going to be talking, if you have any comments or questions, I'm going to be taking care of the chat to make sure that he's not going to miss anything when he finishes his presentation. So please share it on that, and I will keep track of that. Sorry, that's me.
Awesome, and the pressure's on now. Apparently you're supposed to have fun with me. Oh my God, like all this stuff is going. So I'm really happy to be here for the next 6 hours with you all. So I hope you cleared out your calendars. Just before we get to everything, so I don't know how many of you have had talks or conferences in Canada lately, but of course we are on a reconciliation journey with our Indigenous First Nations. So I want to definitely acknowledge that I am on the land that we're talking today, or from where I am in here in the city called Toronto, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home, of course, to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And Toronto is actually part of something called the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And this is also a very important piece for me because my father is Anishinaabe Algonquin from north of the Ottawa Valley. Although I was not brought up in tradition and did not even know I had that history and tradition for a long time, which is a great example of assimilation on all matters and counts. It is something that's very, very important to me. So very glad to be here to discuss some of the origin stories behind this WEAll CAN, because, number one, it had to happen simply because of the acronym. I mean, seriously, right? It's like mashing a bit of a drama together with some well-being economies, and then you get the WEAll CAN. So I wanted to kind of kickstart maybe with a question, a teaser, sort of see where your thought process is at in all this. Of course, we're tackling this world of economic paradigm shifting, and oftentimes we kind of fall into that space where you hear it a lot, right? Oh, you can't change the system. Oh, it's not possible. Oh, you can't do that. So I guess my start off question really was, in your experience, a lot of people, 30 people here on this call, what is an example of an economic paradigm actually having been shifted? Does anybody have one that just pops to mind? Like
You know,
literally a whole big, huge system completely having been redesigned. Give you a clue, less than 80 years old.
Mark.
Yeah, that's, yeah, absolutely. Neoliberalism, that's a type.
Mhm.
So maybe I'll just kind of point that to, let's say, some examples, very, 20th century examples. So if you're from the UK and Europe, the Second World War is a big one, right? So before the war, you had a certain type of economic purpose and system. And then to meet the needs, I guess, or the goals of a war, anyways, we won't go into that, you had to redesign the entire paradigm. And then at the end of the war, you redesigned it again. So anytime I get that question, oh, you can't change it, you can't change it, I don't even have to go that far back in history to show you, actually, we keep changing it. And so that was sort of a little bit that origin story when it comes to the WEAll CAN. I'll share my screen now, which is always interesting. I normally use Prezi, so I'm relearning PowerPoint. Hold on a second. There should be a little bit of elevator music for PowerPoint. There you go. And I think you should be seeing a starry sky. Did everybody see that? Thumbs up? Okay, awesome. And so I've been with this foundation called the David Suzuki Foundation, which if you're not from Canada, not necessarily everyone's familiar globally with David Suzuki, but in North America, he's like the equivalent of the David Attenborough of Europe. Although I think even David Attenborough's, but when the two Davids met for dinner before COVID, our David was very, very humbled in the presence of David Attenborough. So David Suzuki is an iconic cultural, political, scientific, figure icon in Canadian society. He's been the face of basically the nature of things, a big documentary here every week. Been an activist for a long time. He's about to celebrate his 85th birthday. And about 30 years ago, him and his wife here, Tara, co-founded the David Suzuki Foundation, mainly at the time looking at what was going on in the Amazon with indigenous peoples in the Amazon. And that was the focus initially of the foundation. And over time, a lot more of that domestic focus has come into play. So just to give you a bit of that background of who we are before I get into why we started looking at WEAll CAN, traditionally, the foundation's been very at the forefront of kind of climate activism, climate solutions, knowledge generation. Last couple of years, of course, we helped organize and provide a platform for probably one of the largest, I think the largest climate march ever in Canada, Montreal, 500,000 people. And so again, you just see with the energy, what was happening, what's still happening, what needs to happen. And so we're very much in that space. We're also, again, very big in the space of the relationships with nature. So not just always treating nature as biodiversity, which is a very technical term, but also looking deeply at the relationships, working a lot with with indigenous partners and collaborations and colleagues. Using arts as a way. We have a big program on pollinators across the country these days, and we try to work a lot with different artistic communities to bring that out. And another example is our big work across the boreal forest, which is the largest intact biome on the planet, on land, sorry, not the ocean. And here's some nice fuzzy little caribou that we try to protect and save from oil and gas development. And so a few years ago, there was a lot of thinking just before I arrived at the foundation about, okay, we've been doing this for 30 years. Something's not happening. We push for environmental policy. We've been pushing also into the social justice and social policies phase. And yet it always seems like one step forward is two steps backward. And what was that? And so there's a few economists on staff who had a very clear answer when they put their hands up and said, it's the economy, stupid, which is a very famous Bill Clinton saying. And so that got them to thinking, okay, well, if we're going to try to achieve some of these broader systemic goals and changes, we do have to bring in systems thinking. We do have to dare to imagine the unimaginable. And we really have to start tackling not the economy, but the economic system. When I give this talk or any talk on economics in French, it's actually a lot easier because the word economy and economics are quite different in French, whereas in English, they get kind of intertwined. So yes, we all want a green economy, but to have a green economy, you actually need green economics. And that's a very different piece of play. So same thing with well-being. We all want well-being economies. We won't get them if we don't have well-being economic systems. And so that got us to thinking, again, we're looking at all these problems, planetary problems, social problems, always that why. The deeper we could get, the deeper the why, then we started to get into root causes. And of course, economics being one of the most influential human constructs around as the system, it really kind of helped us focus on that. So we started to bounce around some thinking, okay, well, well-being society, what is it all about? Well, we have a flawed model. How do we innovate together? What does it mean to reimagine, redesign? So this was kind of maybe a bit of our starting point. When I arrived back in Canada, so I was living in Norway in nice Scandinavian lifestyle with the UN for about 12 years. And I came back to Canada and I thought, hey, all Canadians must be, thinking social markets like the Norwegians do or anything. And then I realized, of course, if you have a basic conversation about what is the purpose of an economy, certainly what is the purpose of the Canadian economy today, I would get no answer. And that was a telltale sign that there was a disconnect in the literacy. There's something missing to have that conversation in the first place. And then when I would ask Canadians in town halls, what would you like the purpose of the Canadian economy to be? Wow, then you just had I couldn't stop writing on the wall how many answers. And a lot of them came down to things we're familiar with, right? These are all kinds of different models out there. And you can sort of see that qualitative aspect. That was the dominant pattern. People answer purpose with quality, not purpose with quantity. And so as we're starting to figure out then as a foundation, well, okay, how do we contribute into this space? How do we, help lead or enable? And of course, the default reaction would be, well, foundation will produce report, and report will tell people what to do. People will do what we tell them to do. That is a very typical approach. It's also a very typical approach when it comes to governments relying on academics. There's nothing wrong with any of this. It just doesn't lead to the change. There's something else still missing. It's very easy for me when the government says, hey, Yannick, can you point to me a model of well-being frameworks that we can read? It takes me 5 minutes, right? Here's the donut. Here's One Planet Living. Here's gross national happiness. There's no problem. We do not have a lack of models, knowledge, science, technology. There is no knowledge gap. That's the starting point. We don't need more research. We do not need more reports. What do we need? And that's still that magic space that we're not quite sure. The humanness in us is where change happens, the emotion, the intuitive, and Western culture does not like getting into that messiness, right? Whoa, that's just messy stuff. That talking about the emotions, emotions. Oh. And so one thing we realized very quickly through our discussions and our conversations is, and this is from John Capley in the UK, a Guardian's piece a few years ago, but he wrote a book on this, like, we need to realize as change enablers that the whole discourse of paradigm shifting an economic system or way of thinking is not a technical discussion, okay? Economics is a religion, right? If I talk to my parents, when I watch them look at the business news, and they, oh, hey, Yannick, GDP's up, this is really good, it's really good. And then I ask them, why is it good? There is no answer, it's on faith. And that's a challenge, right? The change makers, we like to get the science out, the numbers, put the numbers in front of the people will change. Never happens, that's not how change happens. So when we say that the old ways won't work, it's not just about the technical aspects, but the process piece. We keep thinking that if I give enough data to you, you will change, right? I always remind a lot of the students I mentor, there's a couple of constants in the universe. Change is one of them. Change is always happening, number one, right? And the second one is we all hate to change. I want you to change. I don't want to change. That's a universal truth. And I even got my staff one day when I started, I said, just tomorrow, when you walk to work, take a different route on purpose, really conscious, and then tell us how you feel. Ooh, feels horrible. Taking a different route and having to put the brain power to turning left instead of right. We hate to change. And we have to remember that when we're trying to work with communities and groups to enable a change together, right? So, when we started to put the idea of a WEAll CAN hub together, okay, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to make it look? Again, the resistance points that were coming a lot out of a lot of the conversations with Canadians and Indigenous peoples was, you can't do this. Well, not so much the Indigenous people. Canadians, you can't do this. You can't change the system. And so, okay, how do we show back, like I asked at the beginning, some historical moments that have already passed where the entire systems have been changed? And so we started, I always tell the story of Bretton Woods, right? I said, hey, this was a highly successful, massive, globe-changing moment in time. 3 weeks, 730 people, entirely new world order institutions designed, planned, all that. 3 weeks, no internet, no smartphones, no Google, all there. And of course, I also get very quickly the reaction from a lot of people in my town halls, why are they all white? Very interesting question, right? So already we're limited in the solutions that Bretton Woods could come up with. They were still limited by the one cultural worldview, right? So when we look at communism, Marxism, Sizism, Isism, socialism, all the other isms of economic models, ecological economicism, we still also have to keep in mind they are entirely informed by one cultural worldview. It's not to say I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying we have to recognize that. So we're limited, again, in all the solutions that we've come up with so far on economic thinking, except maybe for one country, right? We all know Bhutan. So we kind of put the idea together to decide, well, okay, does DSF lead this? Or do we take our lesson like this, Bretton Woods, and then we say, what if we did, you only get a small amount of the people that were in the lab here, a big group picture, but tiny screen. What if we did start to reach out? What if we did start to put different people, different backgrounds, different geographies? You know, Canada's huge, it's a big country. Lots of deep time history and recent history. Lots of different perspectives and backgrounds. What if we replicated Bretton Woods in a small way, but with everybody this time? Everybody allowed to have some kind of a say, some kind of paintbrush on the canvas, and there you go. I mean, surely we could do better. We can't do worse, right, than what the 730 men came up with at Bretton Woods. And again, keeping in mind that Bretton Woods was an extremely successful event. Do we all like the outcomes? Not the point. It was extremely successful. And so we put together the design lab, which was basically a goal of convening all these people over the month of October. This was originally designed for pre-COVID. We were going to bring in 20 people in person. COVID hit, and it's like, okay, well, we can't do in person. Oh, well, we'll have to do the second best. We'll have to do it online. Turns out, best thing ever in that sense, right? Online, 80 people, even more people could participate, and then having facilitators kind of come in, and then me as a DSF convener not being part of this, right? There's always that danger where, yes, DSFs can, what's good DSF? What do you have to say about this? What do you have to say? You're the expert. So purposefully removing myself from that space. And also making sure there wasn't that many economists in there to make people realize that if you get up in the morning and you have a success or a struggle and you're doing something in life, you are an economic expert. You're experiencing the good, the bad, the ugly. You have expertise to bring back to say, the economy is not meeting my needs. You're an expert. What are you going to do about it? What do you want to do about it? What do you want to imagine? And so these are some of the next few slides are just extracts of we're about to publish and provide the illustrative archive. So I don't want to go too much into sharing all that because it's not been out shared yet with the participants as a final product. So I just extracted some of the very high level pieces, but it shows you the process we went down, right? So A was really focusing on that word purpose and really allowing people to really realize they have a lot of power. The power of their imagination and the power of collective combined imagination is what a new economic system redesign is all about, right? Economists in traditional sense are only experts because we've allowed that to happen. But if you realize, you know, I'm an economist, but I always thought economics was an art. So if you really go down that path of it being an art, then you need all your artists together. So looking at purpose was a big piece, and then we're not going to read all the small print, but some of the things that were teased out were about what is thriving to me, what is thriving to you, what is meaning, what is meaningful, especially during a time of COVID, and we started to have even more powerful conversations all around the world, let alone just Canada. But what is meaning? You know, right now in Ontario, we're having a big discussion on what is essential. And we have a government that has a whole weird definition about that. But anyways, meaning, connection to place, agency, diversity. So what does it all mean? Just the words, but what does it actually all mean in a vernacular, in your day-to-day language, if you're talking to your grandparents, if you're talking to your sister, your brother? And that was the importance of empowering the participants to really dare to imagine what previously may have been deemed unimaginable. So there was also some pieces around pauses and time, right? We have a very high-paced Western culture. Does it have to be like that? Of course not. What does it mean to pause? What does it mean, the slow change versus the fast change? We did a lot of time on equity and looking at, again, not the technical sense and not the data side, but what does it actually mean viscerally and intuitively and emotionally? A lot of work around new ways of knowing and being. Of course, our indigenous peers and colleagues, again, this is 10,000 years of deep knowledge, right? And a very different way of knowing and inquiring. How do you start to bring that into play as well? Some extra pictures of more and more. We had these 3 different groups of about 30-ish people. So just to handle, you don't want to have 80 all at once. So we had 3 cohorts, 2 in English and 1 in French, and able to kind of tease out, again, using the imagination, using your hands and the artist side and you. We even had a poet, share some poetry with us in relating how group work was. So what was the report back from the group? It ended up being a poem, which was absolutely amazing. They also came up with what could be pillars of transformation. Remember, this is a lab that's there to help inspire how the WEAll CAN might work. So it's not there to solve any kind of issues or how do we get to a well-being economy. It really is to help inform how WEAll CAN might go about this and enable. So storytelling came back often, right? One of the first questions I got from the government at the beginning of COVID was basically, well, it was more of a commentary, right? Oh, wow, well, interesting. Most of the time when we engage with economists from the academic setting, they'll often talk to us and we don't actually understand what they're saying, but we have to nod. Because I'm a minister, I have to nod and say, I understand. But if you tell an economics story or an economics narrative in a storytelling mode, then suddenly there's a lot more deeper connections. And you never have to use the word economy and economics. You really get into the kind of the day-to-day language. So those new narratives, the different ways of knowing, holding the circles of knowledge, and trying to move away from this idea that you need to have a steering committee and then an advisory committee, and then that committee has powers and role. What does it look like if you were a bit more organic, right? What if the knowledge pieces were really held by the groups that make sense, to come and go, the kind of emerge and dissolve? Again, some others from different parts of the lab. And then we kind of started closing in the last session. So this was all done over 4 total for each individual. They had 4 sessions, but the 2 middle ones were separate cohorts. So this is when the groups came back together as a whole. We started to look at, okay, well, who's missing, right? And I think, to me, there's a lot here, but the one that struck me the most is I don't think we had anybody who was not necessarily agreeing with us. And you have to be careful. You're not necessarily trying, if you have 20% on the one side of the spectrum and 20% on the other, you're likely not going to convince either. But that 60 in the middle, that's where you want to play. And you need to be able to find respectful, engaging, but not exactly share, we don't share the same exact opinion. So we're going to find a way, perhaps by asking participants in the lab, next time we might convene a bit together, how about you invite somebody you debate with? I have coffee every now and again with a conservative strategist in Canada. Been doing it for a year. We would meet up before COVID and just kind of sit there on a Tuesday, just kind of exchange. Of course, I don't agree with maybe some of the things he stands for. He doesn't agree with, but we were able to have a very interesting and learning conversation. How do we bring that into this space to realize we all want well-being? We just define it maybe slightly differently, and we may disagree on how to get there. But we all want it, and that's pretty universal, and it's not a party politics unless you make it. And then we left it with some of the big questions that the group might still have, and that helps inform, I'm almost at the end, and that helps inform, again, what the WEAll CAN might tackle in the first place, especially the next 2 years, right? The next 2 years are very unique moments in history because of the disruption of COVID. And so what'll happen in the reconstruction and recovery discussions across Canada at the government level. How do you link those conversations with the conversations people are having in their homes, on the ground, in their jobs, etc. And we put together a book club, or they put together a book, not we, they put together a book club, the things they wanted to share with each other. And we're hoping that that just keeps on expanding and is kind of a bit of a living book club that participants might want to get into. And I leave it here. I tell you won't be able to read this, but when I share it, you will. So this is our poet facilitator from the Black Lives Matter movement in Guelph, I believe that Kevin was from. And he kind of put together this great poem at the end that we've been sharing and with his permission around. So you'll see that when I share the presentation. But just again, another powerful way of using art and expression to actually put together a policy point. I mean, this is giving policy direction here. And so it might not be using the traditional way of putting together a paper or a discussion piece. It is way more powerful when somebody's reading that. And we had government people in the lab. We made sure in a way that with the lab, as people came in originally kind of safe behind perhaps the role, the facilitators did a lot of work to take the roles away. We're here as people sharing a land, right? We're all here together. We all have families. We all have whether you're the minister or not, the minister has a family and has children. All that universality is what came out. And then people really spoke from their voice rather than from their professional piece. And that was really, really important and vital. So in the end, the WEAll CAN is really about imagining the unimaginable. We have, again, a moment in history, which is once in a generation, where a system is so disrupted that the unimaginable can be attained right now. What can we do in 2 years? I'm not naive enough to think that the entire paradigm will be shifted in the next 2 years, but give me 5% and I'll be the happiest kid in the corner. So thank you from our two founders.
No, thank you to you, Yannick. Thank you so much. I really, 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 really like it. Thank you for, yeah. So now we can see everybody's faces, almost everybody's faces. And, but again, thank you so much. If you have any questions that you would like to, or ideas or thoughts or things that you want to just share with everybody, now is the moment. Just open your mic or raise your hand so I can keep track of the order so we don't speak all at the same time. But yes, please let me know if you want to share anything that it crossed your mind when you were listening to. All right, so many. So the first hand that I've seen is Simon Farrell, then Mark, and then Vicky. We'll go from there. Let's go, Simon.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Yannick, for a brilliant presentation. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, really good. And let's think about, this is my first WEAll meeting. So I had my first meeting with Anna this morning. So I'm very, very new to this, but incredibly enthusiastic. This is a question really, as again, coming new to this is, I suppose my own personal interest is in business. So I help businesses get a sense of their own purpose and try and embed it to like a social purpose, not necessarily social enterprises, but businesses embracing a more social purpose in what they do. But when you talk about change, and I thought you put it really well about people don't like change, and but change needs to happen. Where does the biggest change need to take place, do you think, in the economic system?
Well, yes, that is. I always tend to answer that from a passion perspective, right? So in a systems approach, every single angle pushing onto that desired change. So when you know the vision that you're trying to emerge as a group of change enablers, my passion is macroeconomics. I love looking at that level and I love pushing there. Does that mean that's the only leverage? Of course not, right? The people working at grassroots pushing up those elements of quality of life, they have to go. I mean, empower, do it. So mine is never going to be better than yours and vice versa. It all has to happen in a certain way. So I think the clarity comes when, like what I found very amazing in this particular lab, 80 people held a pretty strong similar vision of where they'd like things to be. And then after that is, if your passion is transforming business, transform business. If your passion is transform finance, transform finance. from my personal view, why I like to work at the macro is in a system like Canada, we're a federation, a federated system. And so the national government here has all the levers to decide the purpose of the economy, right? So if it decides the only purpose is domestic product growth and number of jobs, not quality, that's what it's going to be. I mean, even though we're the cabinet, you try to have the side policies, but the core operating system remains intact. Now we're seeing a government at our federal level thinking that there is something wrong, acknowledging it. So my passion is, all right, put me around the table and let's have some fun. Because if we can slightly tweak that, if we can slightly say we're about to apparently have Canada, the first G7 quality of life budget coming up in the spring, similar in a way to New Zealand's, that to me is a sign something's changing. And if we can fractalate that down, so imagine now if corporations have to eventually react to the fact where selling more is no longer a reward mechanism, but selling better is, right? So I think for me, it's up there. It does not mean that that is the only or best or better. It just means it has to happen in equal with everything else.
Thank you, Simon, for that question. Really, really good. Mark, your turn. You're on mute.
That's tradition. I just have to be on mute every time I go to speak.
I haven't said it yet, so I'm really glad that you did it because, I was missing it.
Thank you very much, Yannick. A great presentation. I was really lucky. I think back in 2016, I was with a group of First Nation leaders who came over to the Global Justice Now AGM in Scotland to lobby the Royal Bank of Scotland about investment in the Athabasca oil tar sands. And it concerns me that one of the things around the well-being economy is what sort of Greta Thunberg flags up as the kind of the giving the idea that we're doing something about the issues in the kind of time scale that we need to. And I'm just interested in your thoughts in terms of I'm devoutly anti-capitalist and really feel that is absolutely crucial, that the paradigm shift we're talking about is a shift away from neoliberal capitalism, and we need to be using that language no matter how much it might upset people. But I'm really interested in the potential of that paradigm shift, not just in economic terms, but in social terms, in terms of taking forward the rights of indigenous groups, of people suffering from racism, etc., etc. So I'm just interested in such an enlightened group you've got there. Are you concerned yourself about trying to cozy up to people to change their mind when these are incredibly crucial issues that we're talking about? Sometimes we just have to upset people.
Yeah, I agree. In a way, you're not necessarily trying to upset, you're trying to, through awareness, somebody might get upset, right? So in my town halls, when I would just ask some questions, just, describe something, right? When I describe GDP in very vernacular terms, how quickly do you convert nature to money using cheap labor? The reaction people would have to that was, but I'm not the one who told them to react that way, right? That's what I always want to be careful. I want to be able to inform, help tease out the story. And then from there, what do people feel about that? Is that an okay purpose for an economy? And of course, most will say, wait a minute, I don't know, was that? No, that's not okay. And that starts the conversations, because it triggers then the imagination of saying, well, if human beings created that algorithm, well, that means we can create any algorithm. Now, and I think you're touching on an interesting point of that slow versus the fast, right? Balancing this deep desire. I mean, I work in an activistic organization. I've never been particularly activistic, maybe my personality or something. So it's always a tension to sort of saying, we need this change now, and versus some of the things that no matter what will only change slowly just because of the nature of what you're doing. How do you hold the two tensions, for example, right? Now, we are seeing some of that accelerated change. I think I never want to say COVID is an opportunity. I hope you understand. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's created odd, unpredictable opportunities where some things in Canada are moving faster, including things around fossil fuels, including things around Indigenous rights, that are working faster than they would have had it not happened. So I'm not saying I want it to happen, but I mean, there's a noticing to be had there. So some of the things that might have been in the slow lane are suddenly kind of trickling into the fast lane. How do we push that? Let's as long as we have the 2-year disruption, let's do all we can to move those things. And then there'll always still be some. I mean, the economy, the economic system, there's a codependency, right? I have a mortgage. I'm complicit. I'm part of that, right? I'm stuck in sometimes. If I'm not careful, there's problems, right? There's consequences. So I think it's how do you invite in that potential to have those conversations, not to just immediately go from Monday to Tuesday to one system to another. How do you sunset as you sunrise? How do you sunset a paradigm as you sunrise it? Now, there are no global or even national agencies that have that mandate. That's a problem. Why is there no Ministry of Transition in Canada? Could be. There's nothing that stops you from having one. What would be their responsibility? Okay, well, how do you invest in sunsetting perhaps sectors or elements of our economy that no longer have a valid purpose as we start to sunrise the ones that do? How do we transform what money is, right? Big conversation in Canada right now is, oh my God, COVID debt. And it's like a credit card and now my children are gonna pay for it. That is hogwash. You cannot compare sovereign debt to a household, yet the media still does it, economists still do it. It is complete falsehood, but that we're stuck there. How do you unstuck that? So I think it's a combination of kind of starting to write the new stories, not from the top down, but really in a participatory way to help realize, hey, we've always done economy as human beings. Economy is just an abstract concept, right? A way of transforming and transacting. But everything that has to do with economic thinking is purely the limits of our imagination. I don't know if that helped to answer, but it's never a clear thing. And the one thing about, I like how you say I'm anti-capitalist. I get that question a lot. Oh, are you an anti-capitalist? I wouldn't actually know. And this is purely from an economics angle. We've never had pure capitalism. So theoretical, pure capitalism has not actually existed, because at every step of the way, what do people do? We like to manipulate, we like to influence, and so suddenly you have manipulated capitalism, you have manipulated markets. We've never had free markets, it's not existed. So in a true Friedrich Hayek form, if you go and look at the purest of capitalism, Hayek, then you'll notice we've never had it. So I don't even know how to answer that question. Capitalism without purpose is my problem. So capital, money that has no purpose, that's why we're here today. If it had purpose, what would that look like? If money was given a purpose, a specific one, what if our currencies were all tied to carbon? They used to be tied to gold, but gold has no value. What if it was tied to carbon? That could be an interesting form of capitalism. Carbon capitalism, I'd like that. So I think it's just, we have to be careful of the words and the labels.
So thank you, Yannick. So I have many hands over, so I'm going to try to put some order in here so we all know. So Yannick, it's 5:33. You know that I'm always very respectful with time. So Vicky is going to be the first one. Then Peter Doddern left note that I'm going to read to you once Vicky has finished. Amanda asked me for a question, and then I can say Dirk and Caroline. So I hope I'm not missing anybody. This is as far as I see. So Vicky, go ahead and let's try to make the most out of this last 15 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Yannick, for your presentation. I want to just focus in really, really hard on what you said about purpose. When you ask the question about purpose, you say that people always respond with qualitative answers. And I think all of us understand that, but the problem for me is the actual numbers. I want a return on my qualitative investment. And this involves compensating the positive externalities. So I want to know in some kind of numbers, if you have any examples or some kind of accounting practices, how you are starting to measure the qualitative aspects of what people want from the economy. Thank you.
Ooh, we can have a whole other session on that. I really love the question. And yes, you're right. We get that a lot at the foundation too. How do you account for this? How would you put together a framework that measures it? And the biggest stumbling block I see to that is not the ability to do it. It's the desire for perfection. So our federal government, for example, will commission a bunch of reports to try to get to the perfect quality of life well-being indicator framework. You can't get perfect. It's impossible, right? Because quality of life is a subjective piece. So to me, the opportunity then becomes, how do you educate into an old system, which was very linear, very quantitative, and very prescriptive, the idea of pluralism, complexity, almost like organic accounting. How do you bring in those frameworks? There are examples of them, right? So the gross national happiness is an example of qualitative meets quantitative. So you're throwing in qualitative by having conversations with people, and you're coming out through their quite robust statistical analysis, a semi-quantitative piece to give numbers to the government to sort of make those decisions. You have it a lot more, the more local scale you are, the more it's accepted. And there's a reason for that. If you're a city councillor, you live in the place you're making decisions on. You have a much more visceral, emotional, intuitive connection. You'll want to do something about it, and you might not wait for some kind of high quantitative accounting measure to decide, there's a garbage problem on my street. I'm gonna find a way to fix it. As soon as you get into the higher levels of governance, aggregation becomes a problem. You don't necessarily live there. So you're right, you're trying to find these tools. There are no lack of examples. In Canada, we have the Canadian Index of Wellbeing. Globally, you have the Human Development Index. I'm not a big fan in a certain way of how the SDGs are measured, so I won't go too much down. I fought too long when I was at the UN for SDG 8 to not exist, and it did. But if you're looking at, natural capital accounts do exist. There's not so much of well-being accounts yet, but they're starting to be. We're starting to see a little bit of that with the New Zealand approach. So I think in the end, it still comes down to what is it not only that you want to measure, what is the actual outcome you intend? And then you design the measurement scheme to get there, and then try to get over the old thinking that it has to be a kind of old school national accounts or something, right? You're trying to create pluralism and allow that to happen. A lot of work being done in AI, artificial intelligence, now to actually help with that. How do you find patterns where you might have super determinants of well-being? And so I'll give one thought exercise example from Catherine Trebek from the WEAll, right? Girls riding bikes. So if the Canadian economy, the performance was measured by that number, how many SDGs have to change for the number of girls riding bikes to school or after dark to increase? It's a lot. It's like 4 or 5 SDGs that have to change. So imagine with that one number, you're accounting for a whole new degree of well-being and economic performance. And those are just thought exercises there. So I think that the more difficult part is less about the how to do it. It's more about the why and the what.
Thank you, Yannick. And thank you, Vicky, for the question. So Peter, I'm going to give you the opportunity. I don't know if you want to mention your comment on the chat. Sorry for missing it before, but I could read it for you. Just feel free. If you want to open your mic, you want me to do it.
There's a lot of background noise today, and I just wondered if you'd like to put the point. The reason for posing the question is the overall theme of diversity, and I wondered why we don't need to be more sensitive to the need to decolonize our economic discourse as part of this conversation. So I was surprised at the selection of the example. But if you could put the point, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, he wrote down, from a colonial perspective, Bretton Woods was a point of continuity and not a break from history.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, Bretton Woods. So if you look at how we got to the economic model, global, not just economic model, but also our global governance system, so our modern democracies, it's 2,000 years of the cognitive history of one culture. And so absolutely, right? We haven't deviated from it at all. And so when you look at even the Chinese economic system is entirely Western, right? It's based on Western thinking. So I think this is where we have this moment in time, how, being aware of the limitations, and the field of economics is still dominated by Western white Europeans, right? And primarily men. And so we've reached the limit of the imagination potential of that one group. And that's okay, great, done. Now, how do we bring in more imagination? It can't probably be by that same group trying to rehash the problem over and over. So decolonizing is not only, like, I agree with you, not just in the context of towards indigenous First Nations, but decolonizing our entire way of thinking about this problem, right? And that's something I think that is starting, especially, again, COVID has opened up a lot of these windows where these conversations that were not happening before are starting to happen. And how do we make sure that continues in a generative way, and hopefully not a 10, 20-year way, but a generative, quicker way, to sort of say, we need more imagination power, and it's not going to come from the same one group. How do we combine those forces? How do we all come together? So I agree. I mean, even the question that Vicky had about the accounting and the numbers and the indicators, it's tough conversations with our government here. They still want the same way of doing accounting, but now they're applying it to a different problem and they're realizing it's not working so well. But it's still that's stuck. We're stuck thinking that you can only account for something in a certain way. And we're trying to say, well, actually, you can account for something any way you want, as long as you decide on a way, right? And as long as it's agreeable, and as long as society comes to you and says, yeah, this is we agree with that. And not to wait for perfection. I mean, Canada has two potential frameworks of quality of life and the question they had to us was, well, which one should we pick? And I said, just pick any, because it can't be worse than the current one. And so I think it's a little bit of that. I 100% agree with you, Peter. Bretton Woods, neoliberal, Thatcher, Reagan, all of that is still one cultural worldview. We need to move beyond that. And it's not to point fingers and say we have to alienate that worldview and get rid of it. It's how do we merge more and more in other worldviews and ways of thinking together to sort of get the completely unpredictable out. That's what we want, the unpredictable, the things you can't possibly imagine on your own.
And imaginal that you were talking about. Amanda, it's going to be you. 10 minutes to 6. Let's go for that.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Yannick. This is amazing. I'm loving this. So your presentation is great, and I like the questions a lot. Something I wanted to ask you, particularly when thinking about indigenous knowledge and its relationship to the economy, is that, the whole conception of the economy as a different area of life, right, is something that very much came out of a very particular kind of cultural tradition. And so and now it's imbued with so many different understandings, both in terms of like methodological process and what it means and its power and why it's important. Is engaging within that space, like changing it, changing our understandings of the economy, really the way to go? Or is it really unlearning the idea of the economy that kind of needs to happen so we can just see our relationship to nature and one another in a more holistic way?
Yeah, I mean, so again, so economy and economics. So the economic system is the way we think about economy, right? And that's based on our values and our beliefs, cultural, and that's always a cultural lens. So European values and beliefs were primarily about extraction, utility, right? You take from nature, you create something human, and then yay, it's great. It also was based on the belief, the core belief that you had a class system. There were some that were better than others, and that was taken to extremes, obviously. So that is a set of cultural values and beliefs that you can follow and track through history. With Indigenous First Nations in Canada, or even Indigenous European, right? We forget that Europeans had Indigenous as well, right? Celtics, Druids, all those, way back when, the holistic worldview of starting to notice, okay, well, what does an economic system look like in that worldview, right? The Indigenous First Nations had an economy before the Europeans arrived. Was it informed by subjugation, conquest, extraction, utility? No. That's the different part, right? So when we say different ways of knowing, different ways of informing, it is also then kind of going into those deep core held beliefs and values. That's why I was saying economics is more like a religion. If we still agree that an upper class, a middle class, and a lower class is a normal thing. We have to have it. That's just how it is. Then we'll perpetuate that belief. If we suddenly say, actually, no, that's not okay, then you can start to redesign an entirely, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's some easy thing. It's quite simple, but it's not easy, right? Because the power dynamics, those who hold all the money, those who hold the influence, which is still a tiny fragment, and we're starting to see cracks in that wall as well. So I think, to me, it's always about, again, words have meaning and power, and we have to be careful that, okay, if right now we work a lot with Indigenous First Nations in Canada about if the settlers hadn't happened, what did it look like to practice economy before then? They didn't have the word economy, right? And you have the circle, the medicine wheel of the 5 values. That's an economic system. So we have to translate it in English as that word. But in Indigenous worldview, it doesn't have that word. It's just, it is life, right? Water is life, tree is life. And so that's what we have to look at, is our own values, the beliefs, the morals we have, the norms, and then decide which ones are no longer valid in the 21st century and which ones we're opening ourselves to reimagining together as a collective.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both. Dirk and Caroline, Dirk, it's your turn. I hope that you're going to be able to stay for a few more minutes, because I don't think this is going to be possible in 5 minutes. So please stay. But of course, for those who are not going to be able to make it a little bit longer, just want you to know that I'm recording, I'm saving the chat, and everything is going to be shared on the WEAll Citizens platform and on the Slack. So Dirk, your turn.
Thank you. Yes. So let me first of all say, Yannick, that the work that you guys do up in Canada at the David Suzuki Foundation is beautiful. So thank you for all of that. Yeah, so I am tempted to ask you 2 unfairly, ridiculously big questions, because like you, I think in big terms, but let me try it anyway and see what your quick response might be. One has to do with something that comes up in the conversation time and again. And I just had a conversation this morning with Van Jones, who brought this up again, which is this problem that talking and discussing and writing papers and having conferences doesn't change the world. Doing something does. And so I just wanted to throw that out and see, what you might have as advice to all the young people that we work with, who oftentimes get stuck in social media and talking and discussing and being right and all that, but not really doing. But 2, maybe I can add into that question this other thing. So I really appreciated a lot that you said that we actually have a lot of knowledge and that we have very good models, that knowledge is not the problem. Translating idea into action is the problem. And so you were asked about the most important issue, and you kind of dodged that because you said we need to work on all sorts of levels, which of course I agree with. But isn't there one really most important issue, which is to redirect the economy from return on investment to well-being of people and planet? I mean, isn't that on all levels ultimately what it's about? So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that it's always the how, right, to do it, that it becomes then, okay, do I discourage somebody from following their passion, intuition in the how? But obviously we know we have a misalignment of purpose, right? We serve the economy when it should be serving us. That's what's happening. And the us is not necessarily collectively the same, right? We absolutely know well-being deficits abound in a country like Canada, and we're a rich country. So I always want to be conscious that there's not just one us in this case, but it is that there's a misalignment of purpose. And you're right, if we can tweak as much as we can, especially the next 2 years, the Overton window of the well-being space and COVID recovery, can we push to realign some, or where, right? I do think personally, Canada and New Zealand are in a unique position amongst the quote unquote rich countries, the G20, mainly because of the ideologies of their current leadership. I think UK, Australia, and the US will have a harder time moving away or realigning the economic side, but who knows, right? On the other, so then to me, so to get to that realignment, it is the micro to macro in a ball, right? You do have to follow your passion, because when I've noticed change makers or change enablers or activists, especially youth, if they're going after something that doesn't personally align with their passion, but they just feel they have a burden to do it, it de-energizes it and you don't last long. Whereas if you're doing something you judge yourself as being small, oh, it's just a small thing I know about, I'm trying, man, no, don't self-judge, right? If you're doing something, if you're bringing, you're caring for elders in your community and you think that's not having some kind of a big impact somewhere, it is. You just don't worry about it. Just do it, because it energizes you, it keeps you going, it keeps you motivation. So that ties into that the first question you had about, what we're trying to do in our organization now. We're moving to distributed organizing, supporting youth groups on their terms, and then also not to show them, don't self-judge because you're stopping yourself from following your passion. Anything that's systemic change means the entire system. So your part in it is valid, right? If you're going in that direction of generating well-being, quality of life in some way, you are contributing to that. And as long as you stay energized by your passion, and I always come down to also say one of the biggest KPIs for that is fun. If you are not having fun in your movement, something is not going right. And it's absolutely okay to have fun. It could be a tough thing. Climate change is a hell of a tough fight if you're a youth these days, right? You feel your future is being robbed from you. And it is, in a way it is. So if you can't find a way to get a community around you and your friends and your people together and doing something and have some fun and not feel guilty about it, that's going to be draining and it's going to be de-energizing. So that's one of the things that I certainly have the fun, make sure it's there.
Thank you, Yannick. I'm so glad that I said at the very beginning that we were going to have fun with you. Anyway, Caroline, it's going to be you, and then I'm going to wrap up this amazing talk. So, all yours. The mic is yours.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for this talk. It's been really, really interesting. I had a very quick remark to make, and I wondered if you had any reaction. You were mentioning earlier that words are very important, and it occurred to me also there was a little discussion about capitalism earlier yet. And I just wanted to mention that for me, I think it's really important to look at the definitions of what we're talking about and check that we're actually talking about the same thing. For example, with capitalism, I find that it's very much a trigger word. I think of it almost as an entropic kind of word, because I think it spins people off in different directions. Once you say that word, everybody has this idea about what it means. And for some people, I think it means it's a system that includes a class of people that live off the labor of others. So that's kind of almost a standard definition for a lot of people. But then for other people, it's more of a system that's dependent on debt and on growth, economic growth. And so that's a really important part of it. And then for a lot of people, I find, if I try to criticize capitalism, they think that what I'm saying is that the government should run everything. There shouldn't be any private business or any even worker cooperatives or anything like that. It should be the government deciding everything. So I think it's really good to tease out, if somebody finds that idea upsetting, any criticism of capitalism, or conversely, any support of capitalism upsetting, I find it very helpful to try and tease out what's bothering, what's the trigger here, what's the worry, because I think a lot of times there's a muddle about definitions and it's not clear, that we're actually talking about the same thing. So you end up arguing past each other, shouting. And then one last thing, we're very interested also, I'm from an organization called FASTA, and we're very interested in the big picture as well. So I loved that you were talking about the big picture and macroeconomics, and tying money to carbon is interesting. We've been looking at that too. We have a few doubts, but we're interested in that. So I'd love to have a chat about it sometime with you if you have a few minutes. That would be great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll just, on the words and meetings, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been working a few years now with Kate Rayworth from Donut Economics, and I met her back at Schumacher College in 2009. And when she says, when people accuse her of being anti-growth, then her response is, I'm growth agnostic. So I'm the same. I'm capitalistic, agnostic, because the problem is it depends on how you're defining it. And if it causes a trigger and a reaction, as it has in some of the town halls, right? I'll have pretty aggressive people saying, "Oh, you're such an anti-capitalist." It's like, well, let's dig into that. Why are you feeling this need to defend a system? So explain to me what you're defending. And of course, that's the problem, right? When you have a faith-based approach, I have to be very careful not to attack someone's religious belief. I'm not there to attack. I'm there to try to shed light. Let's work together on answering some questions. And usually what happens is when people they get to a point where they don't see themselves in that system, right? That's the problem with capitalism. As we know it today, the dominant form of capitalism, there are no people and there's no planet. So eventually when you start to have a conversation, the person loses them. They can't see themselves anymore. And then they wonder, how come I can't see myself? So how do you take back those words? I mean, there was a movement out of the UK, the 5 capitals movement, right? Trying to take the word back. It didn't work so well because I think you're right. It is such a historically charged word now. So I just tend to just kind of go into, what is it? Purpose is a more universal one. If capitalism can have that purpose, my opinion is no, not the way we have it. But if we all align towards a core purpose of well-being, however we want to define it across the different cultural and societal lenses, then we'll get there. We'll design the right set of algorithms and equations needed to measure that. So, I agree. Again, trigger words to me are a great learning opportunity for all sides.
So true. Okay, so we are coming to an end. Now is for real. And Yannick, I don't know if you want to say something before I wrap up. Please feel free. The mic is yours. How you want to say, whatever you want to share before we end.
Just being thankful. I think to me, sometimes we think these presentations are like, monologue, but all these conversations for me are what generates the next idea, and anytime, so to me, this is as valuable. I hope that it was maybe valuable for you. Transformational, not transactional. So I thank you all for your great questions. I don't profess to have the right answers. I have opinions and hopefully I can contribute. And I think the journey is on. And to me, the next 2 years are massively important. 2 years. Don't think 3, think 2.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Yannick. Thank you for everything. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions, for your questions and ideas and everything that you have shared today. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be sharing this talk on Slack and the WEAll Citizens platform to make sure that you can rewatch it or you can send it and share with anyone else. I'm going to share on the chat as well the link to our YouTube channel, just in case you want to review any other WEAll talks. But as well, I want you to know that there's been a lot of sharing in this chat of books and articles. And so I'm going to make sure that you will have that accessible either on a Slack or on the WEAll Citizens platform. So again, it's been a pleasure to share this hour with you. Thank you, Yannick, as well, for your time and everything that you have shared. And I'll see you soon. And yeah, this is it's been fun and it's been a great way to start this year. So thank you.